The trading post was louder than usual that morning, filled with clinking jars, creaking floorboards, and the low hum of townsfolk haggling over sugar, coffee, and cloth, but Ella Bennett didn't hear any of it. She stood frozen in the doorway, her hands tight around the handles of a basket, because the man behind the counter wasn't the usual clerk, wasn't the tired old man she expected. No, it was someone she hadn't seen in 17 years, someone she thought was long dead, someone who once held her hand by the river and promised forever before leaving for war. And now here he was, in a clean white shirt and black vest, hair slicked back, sleeves rolled up, talking to a boy about the price of salt. And when he turned and saw her, everything else seemed to stop. The boy's voice, the clicking jars, the laughter from the back, all faded as their eyes locked and her breath caught, and she almost dropped the basket, almost turned and ran. But her feet didn't move and neither did his. And then he said her name, just once, low and breathless. Ella, and her heart twisted so fast it made her dizzy, because no one had said it like that since he did, all those years ago, before he vanished into smoke and silence. And she whispered, "Matthew," but it came out more like a gasp, and she took one shaky step inside, the wooden floor groaning under her boots, the basket still clutched to her chest like a shield. And he took a step too, leaving the counter, not caring about the boy or the customers, just walking straight toward her like he was still that 19-year-old boy with sunburned cheeks and dusty boots. And she looked different now. Thinner, older, her brown hair tied back with a frayed ribbon, her dress patched near the hem, and her hands cracked from too much washing and not enough rest. But he looked the same, almost cruelly the same, just older and more confident and clean. And as he reached her, she felt the whole town watching, their whispers like heat on her back. But she didn't care because she needed to know, needed to hear it from him. So she said it, sharp and fast, "You died." And he flinched, just slightly, before answering, "No, I lived." And it hurt more than if he had said yes, because living meant he had chosen not to return. And her voice shook as she said, "You never came back." And he replied, "I couldn't." And she snapped, "You didn't." And the space between them filled with silence, heavy and hot, until she looked down and asked, "Why now?" And he answered, "Because I bought the post and the land behind it." And she blinked, trying to make sense of that. And he added, "I've been back a year," and her breath stopped again, her fingers tightening around the basket because that meant he'd been here the whole time, helping folks, fixing fences, donating wood to the school, while she struggled to feed her son and keep the roof from leaking. And the worst part was she'd heard people talk about the new owner, the generous one, the one who lowered prices and helped widows, and she'd cursed him in her heart for making her feel small. And now she knew it was him, and it felt like a slap. So she whispered, "Why didn't you tell me?" And he said, "I didn't know how." And she shook her head, turned, and walked out fast, her boots hitting the steps hard, the sky suddenly too bright, the road too long. And when she reached her little cabin on the edge of town, she slammed the door and sank to the floor, the basket spilling beans and flour across the boards. And her son Samuel, only 10, came running down from the loft, asking, "Mama, what's wrong?" But she just said, "Nothing," and wiped her tears away before pulling herself back together because there was always work to do, always something broken or missing or sick, and Matthew Hale wasn't part of her world anymore. Not after all these years, not after what he did. But the next morning he came anyway, knocking gently on her door, holding a bag of medicine in one hand and a tin of biscuits in the other. And when she opened the door and saw him there, she didn't say a word, just stared. And he said, "This is for Samuel." And she said, "We don't take charity," and tried to shut the door. But he stopped it with his foot and said, "It's not charity, it's me trying to do something right." And her throat tightened because it sounded like an apology. But she didn't want apologies, she wanted answers. So she said, "You think biscuits make up for leaving me?" And he said, "No, nothing can." And she stood still for a long moment before finally saying, "Fine," and took the biscuits but not the medicine, and shut the door. And he didn't knock again that day. But 2 days later there was a sack of firewood on her porch, and 3 days after that a fresh pie. And every time she told herself she wouldn't take it. But Samuel needed food and warmth and smiles. And every time she saw her boy smile after eating, her heart cracked open just a little more. And one night, as she tucked him in, he whispered, "Mima, is Mr. Hale a good man?" And she didn't know what to say because the truth was she still loved him, still dreamed about him, still woke up with his name on her lips some nights. But love wasn't enough. Not after what she went through. Not after burying her husband. Not after raising a child alone with no one to lean on. But the next time Matthew came, she invited him in. Just for a moment. Just for tea. And they sat in silence while the wind howled outside. And after a while he said, "I wrote you," and pulled a bundle of letters from his coat, tied with a faded ribbon. And her hand shook as she took them, fingers running over the handwriting she knew too well. And she whispered, "I never got these." And he said, "I figured, or you would have answered." And she knew then what happened. Her husband, cruel and jealous, had burned the letters or thrown them away. And all this time she thought Matthew had forgotten her, moved on. But he hadn't. And she read the first one that night after he left, sitting by the fire with tears running down her face. And then the second, and the third, and each one was filled with love, hope, sorrow, and dreams of coming home. And the next morning she found herself walking to the post just to see him. And when he smiled at her, it didn't feel painful anymore. It felt warm. And over the weeks they talked, slowly, carefully, about the past, about what they'd lost, about what they still had. And one afternoon Samuel asked if Mr. Hale could come fishing. And Matthew did, teaching him how to tie knots and throw lines. And Ella watched from the bank, her hands folded, her heart slowly learning to beat differently. And then one night, when Samuel had fallen asleep by the fire, Matthew stayed a little longer, and they sat on the porch, and she said, "Do you still love me?" And he answered, "I never stopped." And she whispered, "I don't know if I can trust love again." And he said, "You don't have to. Just trust me." And she looked at him, really looked, and saw not the boy who left but the man who came back. And she nodded, just a little, and he reached for her hand, and she didn't pull away. And in the spring they married under the old tree by the river, with Samuel holding the rings, and the whole town came to watch, not because Matthew was rich, but because Ella, the widow who never asked for pity, had found love again. And they danced under lanterns, laughed under stars, and when they built a new house by the field, it had a porch with 2 rocking chairs, and every evening they sat there together. And sometimes, when the wind blew just right, she'd smile and say, "You're late." And he'd say, "But I came back," and that was enough.